Hello everybody, Tip Tuesday. Last time we looked at how you cut bias binding. This time we're going to look at how you join it and how you prepare it for applying to your project. So just a little reminder, bias binding is cut across the fabric. So if the fabric is coming off the bolt of off the bolt, you by length, this is the lengthwise grain, this is the crosswise grain, and this is the bias cut. So it's at 45 degrees. Okay, and just to remind you why we do it, if I take a piece, this one has been cut on the lengthwise grain, and if I pop it on my line, just see which line's a good one for you. If I pop it on here, which is 8, and I try and pull it, this is 18, I can't pull it more, okay? If I put my bias strip on and I put my thumb on the 8 here and I put my thumb on the 18 here, if I pull that, I can pull it all the way up to 20. So you can see it's much stretchier, whereas this one won't stretch at all. Okay, so that's great for going around corners, whereas this one would bunch like that. This one will just edge around the corner, which is much easier. Okay, so having cut your bias strips, you're going to have a pile of bias strips, and first thing is you're going to lay, you need a little factory so that you do these in a process so that you end up with all of your seams on one side, on the wrong side. So you lay one out facing upwards towards you. You take another one and you lay it facing down, okay, facing down towards your tummy. So it's coming down towards my tummy, and the two pieces are facing each other. Now, I could try and pull this down. I know this has got a selvage on it, which we don't want, but I could try and pull this down and maybe cut here. The problem is when you use these endy bits, they tend to be far more stretchy than you want to use. And they'll come out of shape. So I tend to always, I'm pulling this up a little bit because it's got the selvage on it, always make sure I've got a complete box. Then I sew, let's move this across a little bit for you. I sew from here to here. So I remember this by thinking of the words on a page. I start reading here and I stop reading there. So I read and I stop. And I'm going to sew across here, okay? Now, if I look at this one, which I've already done, so this one here is already done. So I had bottom one facing up, top one coming down towards my tummy and facing down, so I've got right sides together, and I have sewn across here. Let's get rid of those. I have sewn across here, so now when I pull it open, it's just open, okay, and I've still got that nice bias. I've also distributed the seams so that when it does go onto the fabric, onto my project, I don't have one bulk, it's distributed across the area there. Once you've done a whole load of those, so I've done one, okay, sewn it, then I'm just going to move this one along and I'll put my next one on, facing down, looking for my nice box, move it across a bit, looking for my nice box, sew from here to here, and then move it along, oops, move it along, and then my next one, pop it on here, and you end up with just like a factory that you're going to work out, and then everything, all the seams are on the same side, which is great. Once you've done that and you've got a nice length of bias binding, okay, you have to decide how you're going to apply it, and I'm going to show you 3 methods, okay. So this is, you know, what my bias binding starts off looking like. My first one, and the one that I think a lot of the ladies prefer, is you take your bias binding to the ironing board and you iron one side down by 1/4 inch, okay. And this is really simple. You don't need any tools, you just need an iron. You iron it down by 1/4 inch, and then let's assume this is my fabric. I mean, I know this already has binding on it. Then what I would do is I would attach this here. I'd be sewing it, and then I can flip it over to the other side and I can hand sew it on this side, okay. So I've sewn it on the front, this is my top, okay, my right side. I'm going to sew it down. I'm then going to flip it over and I'm going to hand sew it, okay. I've got an example of the hand sewing. Yeah. So this is my Metro Rings quilt, and this one, just like this, I've applied it, sewn, turned it over, and then I've hand sewn. You can see it's hand sewn on the back. I quite like that sort of slightly bumpy hand sewn look. Okay, it might not be for everybody. Very neat on the front, lovely hand sewn on the back. Well, maybe not so lovely. Okay. The second option is here. You would cut your bias binding thicker here, wider, and this time you don't try and fold down 1/4 of an inch. You fold it in half completely, and that's why you need to cut it thicker. Okay. This time, when you apply it, you've got 2 options. Okay, you can do it exactly as we've just done. So you sew it here, you turn it over, and you've got that nice neat edge. Okay, that's one that you can hand sew. Or alternatively, the real reason you would do this is you turn it to the back, you sew it onto the back. This is the back. Sew it onto the back, you turn it over, and then you just use a machine stitch around it on the right on the edge here. Okay, it's much quicker. I'm not sure it's as nice, but a lot of people use it and it's totally fine. And then here's an example of this. I have actually put an extra piece of fabric in here, so, but don't worry about that. So this has been sewn onto the back, like, where's my piece of fabric? Can't find it. So, oh, here it is. It has been folded in half. Okay, it's been sewn onto the back, and then it's been flipped over onto the front. And then, if you can see, I have machine sewn it all the way down here. Okay, so it's machine sewn, so it's very quick. Uses more fabric because you're going to have thicker strips, but it is by far much quicker. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to show you was using a little tool like this. Okay, so these can be bought very simply from, you know, Amazon or craft stores or sewing shops. You would just take your fabric and you would pop it in here. Make sure you've got a pointy end, pop it in here. Use a pin or something just to pull it down. Okay, and you pull it out. Okay, so if I was doing this, if I was using this, I would pin this to my ironing board, right the way through the ironing board so it stayed still. And then as I pulled this along, I'd be ironing. And what I'd end up with is really nice binding. Okay, now in terms of what I prefer, I probably prefer the first method where you just turn over by 1/4. It doesn't use a huge amount of fabric, and I really like the hand sewing, and that's just me. The second one is fine if I need to do something quickly. This one looks really great and you think, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to buy some of those. The only downside is you need one for each. This is a 3/4 for each size of bias binding you want to make. This is a 3/4 inch. It ends up being 3/4 inch, and you cut it at 1.5. If you wanted it to be 1 inch or 1.5 inch finished or whatever, you'd have to buy different tools. Okay, so maybe if you wanted to buy one for something you'd use regularly, but to be honest, just taking your fabric to the ironing board and then turning it. The one thing I didn't is ideal. The one thing I didn't say was once you've done all your fabrics, you obviously have to just cut off the ears. So I just cut off the ears of this one just to show you. So you would just cut off these little bits that I call ears. Okay, so they can be cut off. And then you can take it to the ironing board and do whichever method you would like. Next time we're going to see applying the binding to a quilt and doing an invisible join.